higher ticket. And last but not least, I think it's pretty clear to Elise Stefanik and others, my response and my retort, and I expect the vice president and others to echo the same thing, is that Joe Biden made a clear and conscious decision that he cannot lead the country for the next 4 years. That does not mean that he cannot lead us for the next 4 months. He's been a noble leader up until this point. He will end his administration with a bang and do the work of the people for the next 4 months. But he made the very consequential decision that serving the next 4 years was something out of the realm of possibility for him to do. And he wanted to turn over that to Kamala Harris. And let me just tell you, as a Democrat, I was national co-chair for Kamala Harris for president. We're so damn excited now. My phone's blowing up. It's going crazy. I think that there is a lot of excitement, a lot of chaos, a lot of confusion. But at the end of the day, Democrats have Kamala Harris and a long list of others, possible VP individuals taking on J.D. Vance and Donald Trump, and we stand a fair chance.
Bakari, it's more like 6 months, not to quibble with you that he will be president, but I certainly take your point.
I'm thinking about the election. I'm getting my dates confused. I'm sorry.
I totally get it. And we're going to come back to you for more reaction in just a moment. I want to get to CNN anchor Kaitlan Collins in New York. Kaitlan, you have some exclusive reaction from the former president and Biden's rival in this race, Donald Trump.
Yeah, Alex, I spoke with former President Trump minutes after President Biden tweeted that he is that he is exiting the 2024 race. Obviously, this has been something that the Trump team has been singularly focused on over the last week, as those calls for Biden to get out of the race did not dissipate. I was told he was tracking this even from the Republican convention while he was focusing on who was speaking when, his own speech that last Thursday night. He was still tracking these efforts, Alex, and he told me in a quote, and I'm quoting the former president now, he said, referencing Biden, "He is the worst president in the history of our country. He goes down as the single worst president by far in the history of our country." But what I pressed him on, Alex, and obviously what's important here is what this means for him and for his campaign. He told me that he believes that Vice President Harris will be easier to beat than Joe Biden would have been. Obviously, we don't know that she is going to be the nominee. Obviously, Biden has endorsed her, but there is a real question among Democrats over what that's going to look like. And also, I should note that Trump's team has been so worried about this exact situation. They wanted President Biden to stay in this race because they looked at the numbers that we were all looking at, that Democrats were all looking at, and they thought that essentially that he would fare better against President Biden in this race, given that debate performance, given what this looks like. This does, as Jeff said, inject a huge amount of uncertainty in this race. We don't know what it means. It's not clear what it means for the Trump team. They are going to be looking at this closely and following that as well. But it is a notable response from Donald Trump, who now has a big question of who it is he's going to be challenging for the presidency come November.
And Kaitlan, game this out for us in terms of what we could expect to see in the coming hours, in terms of responses from those party elders, in terms of the boost in fundraising that Bakari was just talking about, and what the campaign trail is going to be looking like in those next few weeks heading up to the DNC.
I mean, to be frank, we have no idea. The DNC is going to be held 1 month from today. Democrats will be gathering in Chicago, and it's an open question. We've seen Politico reporting Friday night that House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, has endorsed this idea privately of an open convention, should that be the case. Now, we don't know if that's actually what we'll see. This is notable when it comes to donors, though, because we had been hearing a lot of reporting from donors who were telling the Biden campaign that they were not going to be offering more money or helping fundraise more money for the Biden campaign until this very situation was figured out, whether or not President Biden was ultimately going to drop out of the race and who would replace him in that situation. And so now that this has happened, I think that it's a big question for donors. I think it's going to be a big question now that Biden has endorsed Harris as the nominee, if that actually happens, who she would pick to be on the ticket with her. I mean, we just finished the vice presidency nomination race with Donald Trump, and now it is an open question of, if it is Harris on the ticket, who she selects to be her vice president and what that would look like. That was also a factor in Donald Trump's selection of his VP. He was kind of watching that closely to see what was going to happen with the Democratic ticket. They wanted to have a good idea of who they would be up against. And now that has completely changed, even though J.D. Vance is now formally his running mate. And so, I mean, this is just a huge mountain of uncertainty for everyone, I think, a question of what this looks like going forward. And if the party does line up behind what President Biden did today by endorsing Harris as the nominee going forward. Clearly, I mean, I think a lot of people didn't believe there was any other option for that because he picked her to be his vice president. So it would be incredibly unusual if he didn't select her to endorse her as the next nominee after he got out of the race. But obviously, this is uncharted territory for anyone, much less the White House. And so it is a major question of what these next few weeks looks like. But it's safe to say this race has completely altered itself since that CNN debate in Atlanta a little over 3 weeks ago. The entire game has changed, Alex.
Yeah, it certainly was the assumption that if he were to step out, he were to drop out of this race, that he would hand things over to Kamala Harris. But it is not, as we've just been discussing, a foregone conclusion that she is necessarily the nominee. That is one of the biggest questions, if not the biggest right now. I want to get back to Priscilla Alvarez, who is traveling with the president. Priscilla, what more are you learning from the White House just moments after the president made this historic announcement?
Well, we're learning a little bit more about what happened in the minutes before the president put out this letter. Sources telling our colleague MJ Lee that the president informed senior campaign and White House team about his decision before the letter went out, saying that he had been reflecting over the last couple days. And of course, this decision was being very closely held. Of course, what the president was doing over the last couple days, in addition to deliberating, was that he was self-isolating. He was diagnosed with COVID earlier last week, and he immediately came here to his residence in Delaware. He got here on Wednesday, has since been behind closed doors, self-isolating, as his doctor had said. His symptoms were improving, and over that time, we are now getting a better picture of what was happening. He was listening to those around him. He was reflecting on what the next steps were, and clearly came to this decision to not seek re-election. And it was in the minutes, again, before putting out this letter that he had notified his senior campaign and White House team. Now, of course, the president, in addition to putting out this letter, has provided his endorsement of Vice President Kamala Harris, essentially urging Democrats to get in line behind her. We should note that the vice president this upcoming week had travel plans to go to Milwaukee for events, another sort of attempt at following the Republican National Convention there to provide her counter-programming. The vice president, of course, has spent a lot of the time on the campaign trail really focused on reproductive rights. That has been a line of attack consistently against Republicans, and an assignment that was provided by the campaign fairly early on. Already in January was she out there talking about one of the most galvanizing issues for Democrats and this campaign. So I think you've heard now from everyone that there are so many questions about what happens next. There's so much uncertainty, but the president at least offering a little bit of a notification and some behind the scenes here in terms of how he had been reflecting over the last few days to his senior team. And now we are also getting a deluge of reactions from his allies supporting this decision and moving forward with the party. So again, just to reiterate here, it has now been 24 days from that June debate. 24 days out, this is where we are now. The president deciding not to seek re-election, notifying his senior team only moments before putting out this letter for the entire public to see.
All right, Priscilla, stay with us. Jeff Zeleny, back to you. When do you think we can expect to hear from Kamala Harris? And then the biggest question to her, I think, is going to be, who is her running mate?
That is the central question now. And again, this is not, even though this news is a bit of a shock, the timing of it this afternoon, there have been quiet discussions that have been growing louder over the last 3 weeks. What would she do if? So certainly there are some top potential candidates. She will have the ability to choose her own running mate should she become the nominee. But I'm told just by all our reporting in these last few weeks that she's not likely to wait until she's formally nominated. She is moving forward with this. So the Democratic governors are certainly those who come to mind. Josh Shapiro from Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania is such a key state, of course, in all of this. She was down in North Carolina just last week campaigning with their governor, Roy Cooper, who is term limited and he is leaving office. Of course, other governors as well. Minnesota Governor Tim Walz, the governor of Illinois, J.B. Pritzker. So it would be hard to imagine that governors would not be at the top of the list or the only list here going forward. But just speaking to another Democratic advisor, as you were on the in the interview with Caitlin there, this senior Democratic official says that people will unite behind Harris who would run against her. So we will see. This is unfolding on a Sunday. Some people are just getting this information, but it is unlikely that a governor would not be at the center of this list.
To add to your list, Beshear from Kentucky is someone who's been named a lot. Gavin Newsom from California.
Unlikely Gavin Newsom, because he would have the same constitutional issues being a resident of California. And Andy Beshear, absolutely. Some Democrats believe that he would be a good messaging thing. It's going to be who she is comfortable with, but also this is a dramatically different race going forward. It's a tougher race for Democrats. The battleground is already expanding more. So someone from the blue wall, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, we shouldn't rule out the possibility of Gretchen Whitmer. That would be certainly history making of its own, 2 women on the ticket. But look, this is someone that is going to be Vice President Harris. Should she become the nominee, this is going to be her first and biggest choice.
And we have heard from Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer, who posted on X that she was thanking President Joe Biden and said, quote, that her role will remain the same, doing everything I can to elect Democrats and stop Donald Trump. I'd like to go back to Bakari Sellers. Bakari, when you listen to that list of governors that Jeff was just mentioning, is there anyone there who you think says, okay, actually now this is my moment. I would like to challenge Vice President Harris for this? Or do you expect them to largely fall in line and do whatever they can? Because, as we were just discussing, there are only 4 months to go before this election.
No, I don't expect. All of those governors that were named are very talented. I don't have any indication that they are going to run during this short frame. I know that Gretchen Whitmer has already said no. Gavin Newsom, of course, said no and is eliminated from vice presidential conversations because of the constitutional issues. I would want to add 2 more people to Jeff's list of individuals, or maybe 3 more. Admiral McCraven is somebody who I believe Kamala Harris would look at with some keen eye. I would also include Mark Kelly, who is an amazing senator from the great state of Arizona, which is also a swing state, married to Gabby Giffords. We all know his background, his history, a fighter pilot and astronaut. I think that he brings something to the campaign that would be formidable against J.D. Vance and Donald Trump. Also in the business world, you have names like Mark Cuban and others who would be bandied about. But I do believe, you will look at Josh Shapiro, you will look at Roy Cooper from the great state of North Carolina. You will look at somebody like an Andy Beshear, but I think that somebody like a Mark Kelly probably would be pushed to the top or near the top of the ticket. But these are all decisions that will be made. I can tell you the first thing that Kamala Harris has to do, something that that work begins right now with the credentials meeting, is as soon as these individuals get their credentials, these delegates, firming up delegates. It's a mini campaign. I think a lot of people come on TV and really don't know the process, but you have to go out there and get these delegates. Many of them are going to be willing to support them. My phone is blowing up with people who are pissed off, and the reason they're pissed off is because they feel like people from on high pushed Joe Biden out the door. And the text that I just got from a friend was like, if they pushed Joe Biden out the door, what are they going to do with Kamala Harris? They will probably try to push her too. There's a great deal of fear out there. And the people who've done the damage, the Nancy Pelosi's, the Chuck Schumers, those party quote unquote elders in leadership, it would behoove us all if they came out and wrapped their arms around Kamala Harris sooner rather than later, and probably, save those celebratory mimosas for another day, because we have work to do. And so I'm gonna be on the phone tonight calling delegates, getting them, whipping them up, trying to get them on board for Kamala Harris. I don't think that's gonna be a difficult task. And anything else the vice president needs to do, I'll be there, because right now Kamala Harris has her work cut out for her. She's running against the oldest nominee for president of the United States in American history. And so when you have this type of change election, when you have this type of generational divide that you have, it's a question of whether or not you want to go backwards with Donald Trump or forward with Kamala Harris. I mean, the man is nearly 80 years old. And so the question is, can he serve another 4 years? I'm not sure he can.
Yeah, that is certainly a concern among Democrats, the backlash, the potential anger for the perception that Joe Biden was pushed out of this race. I want to go back to CNN anchor Caitlin Collins in New York, who's going to pick up our coverage. Caitlin.
Yeah, Alex, of course, this is changing by the moment now as we are closely following this breaking news this hour. And just to get everyone up to speed, President Biden has announced in a letter that was posted online a short time ago that he is exiting the 2024 race. He followed up by saying that he is endorsing his Vice President Kamala Harris to be the Democratic nominee, but this has thrown a lot of uncertainty into this race. It is a complicated process to replace the nominee, and that is a major question of what will happen next. There are a lot of phone calls happening behind the scenes right now from all of our sources, from top Democrats who are asking themselves that very question of what happens next. I want to bring in Ron Brownstein, CNN's senior political analyst, who had written a lot about this dynamic that was facing Democrats, Ron. And this, you just wrote in The Atlantic a few days ago talking about how you believed keeping Biden on the ticket was forcing Democrats to drift toward disaster. What do you make of this decision now that the president has come to as he has been sequestered away in Rehoboth Beach dealing with COVID-19? We just got an update from his doctor this morning, and then this letter dropping this afternoon.
You know, Caitlin, the famous economist Herb Stein had a dictum that, you know, any trend that can't be sustained won't be. And somewhere in the beyond, Herb Stein is being validated again. I mean, the situation had become untenable since the debate. There was no way that Americans could unseat what they saw, which was evidence of, you know, that caused concern about whether Biden was up to doing the job for another 4 years. It wasn't only the question of whether he could beat Trump. It was the question about whether he could do the job for another 4 years. And that consensus spread in sort of concentric circles in the Democratic Party, starting with donors and strategists, moving out to more and more elected officials. And then in the most recent polls, a majority of the voters as well. And so, you know, as I tweeted, what would it mean to be the Democratic nominee if the Democratic congressional leadership, Nancy Pelosi, you know, Barack Obama, a majority of the voters, a majority of the donors thought you shouldn't? I think Democrats understand that this is a difficult and risky situation to switch from Biden at this point, but it kind of, you know, inverts the saying that he often used: "Don't compare me to the Almighty, compare me to the alternative." The Democrats who understand this is a, you know, uncertain proposition felt that it was a certainty that Biden was not going to get over the top in the states that he needed, and thus jumping out of the speeding car as it headed toward the cliff was a better bet than staying in the car as it went over the cliff.
Yeah, but the question now is if you've stopped that car from where you thought it was headed, Ron. I do think it's an open question of what happens now. I mean, do you expect Democrats to rally behind Vice President Harris, or do you expect it to be a situation where obviously Biden has the power to release his delegates that we're going to be voting to affirm him as the nominee 1 month from now in Chicago? What does that look like over the next few days?
Well, first of all, technically, he doesn't even have to release them. You know, the Democrats changed their rules in the 80s. You are not obligated as a Democratic delegate to vote even on the first ballot for the person that you are pledged to. If there's kind of a conscience exemption. So they could have done whatever they wanted, you know, from the outset. You know, the way I felt about this really since the morning after the debate was a question of demand side and supply side. I mean, I think there is a demand side desire for an alternative to Harris, because there are certainly Democrats, both you know, professional strategists, campaign managers, and regular Democratic voters who worry whether she can beat Trump. But I don't think there's going to be a real supply side alternative offered here. I don't think any of the candidates who a significant number of Democrats would consider a better bet would actually run against her. You know, Gavin Newsom and Gretchen Whitmer, who I would put at the top of that list, have already said they won't. I don't think after this enormous internal tension over nudging Biden aside, there's going to be the stomach for climbing another mountain of nudging her aside. And you know, look, I've been talking to people the last couple of days about what the, quote, Kamala coalition could look like. And, you know, she has the potential to help in areas where Biden has been the weakest, younger voters, non-white voters. The question is whether she can maintain where he has been the strongest, which is unexpectedly sustaining his support among white voters very close to his 2020 levels, despite his overall problems. So I think there will actually be pretty quick rallying around her. And if someone runs, I doubt it will be someone who most Democrats would consider a true, full-fledged, top-tier alternative.
Yeah, we had seen the polling that showed her doing well against Trump in a head-to-head matchup. Of course, it's a question now if that becomes the reality, what those numbers look like. Ron Brownstein, stand by. I want to go to CNN's Priscilla Alvarez, who covers the White House for us, who has been tracking all of this as President Biden is in Rehoboth Beach, Delaware. Priscilla, what is the latest you're hearing from White House officials and Democratic sources on their reaction to this breaking news?
Well, certainly they are surprised. The president, only moments before putting out this letter, had advised his senior teams that he had made this decision. He had been reflecting on it over the last couple of days. This was a decision, of course, that had been closely held, and one made, Caitlin, while he was behind closed doors at his Delaware residence, where he has been self-isolating after testing positive for COVID last week. Now, Caitlin, what I am learning now is that I'm getting text messages from sources who say donors, big dollar donors, are now abruptly, suddenly reaching out again to advisors to say they want to donate. This, of course, had been one of the challenges for the Biden campaign over the last several weeks. While fundraising had mostly been a bright spot for the Biden campaign since the president announced his reelection bid last year, we had seen in recent weeks that some big dollar donors were starting to hold back their checks over concerns and questions about President Joe Biden's candidacy. This had also started to become an issue for Democratic strategists who were trying to ensure that that money was still at the very least pouring in to down ballot races. Now that this decision has been made by President Joe Biden not to seek re-election, I am hearing from sources who say that these big dollar donors are coming back in droves now, wanting to give money. We also have reporting from our colleague Kayla, who notes that multiple donors had also reached out to the vice president's team leading up to this decision, saying essentially that they were willing to support her if she were at the top of the ticket. Of course, money is important for any campaign. So what this signals at this point, still early, is that the donors are willing to give to this campaign, knowing now that the president will not be at the top of the ticket. We should also note that the campaign is often boasted about their grassroots fundraising numbers after multiple events. So we'll see, too, whether they see a similar boost from those grassroots donors toward the campaign. But Caitlin, certainly a remarkable moment, not only with Democratic lawmakers who are starting to show some openness, or at the very least some relief, I should say, that the president is deciding to withdraw from this race, but also from the donors who up until this point were holding back that money just because there have been so many questions about his viability as a candidate. Now, of course, White House teams are learning about this as we have been on air. White House officials are in a call about this decision now and what this means moving forward. But certainly everyone absorbing this news as the president, again, had closely held this decision, made it over the last couple days, and then notified his senior teams only moments before putting out that letter. Now, the president did say in this letter that he will address the nation later this week. We don't know when that will be just yet, but he himself has acknowledged that he will also be addressing the American public over this decision to not seek re-election.
Yeah, and he has meetings with world leaders this week. The Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, on Tuesday. We'll wait to see what all that looks like. Priscilla, I'll let you keep checking in with your sources. Let us know if you hear anything new from White House officials. I want to go to Jeff Zeleny, CNN's chief national affairs correspondent, because, Jeff, this creates a huge amount of uncertainty for the person who thought he was challenging Joe Biden on this ticket, Donald Trump, who I should note is already sending out fundraising emails talking about keeping their foot on the pedal as they are looking at all of this and this new dynamic that the Trump campaign finds themselves in.
Caitlin, it absolutely does. And really, we can throw out any of the polling that has been done up until this point. Yes, the record of Vice President Harris will be front and center in this. Of course, she still owns the accomplishments and also the controversial aspects of the Biden-Harris administration. But until she becomes the nominee, if she does, as Ron was saying, we should leave open the possibility for something else happening. I mean, I think none of us would have sort of projected this happening already. So let's leave our minds open to this historic making campaign. However, the Trump campaign clearly is going to be focusing immediately on Vice President Harris. But we know the battleground states that have already been playing out, but a couple questions here. Does her candidacy, should she be the nominee, make some states more competitive, like a Georgia, for example, like a North Carolina? Does it make other states less competitive? So what we know about this campaign, what we've been talking about, how it's, 6 or 7 states, that is not necessarily where this is going to stand perhaps a month from now. But there is no doubt that this is going to upend sort of all of the assumptions here. And as you were talking with Priscilla there, I was speaking with one other senior Biden official, and let me bring this news to you, Caitlin. President Biden's decision, I'm told, to leave the race was reached within the last 48 hours or so, a senior advisor explains to me as he was consulting family members and top advisors. He did not have a single final meeting in Rehoboth, Delaware, where he has been spending the weekend, I'm told, but he was in conversation with them. But an advisor says the president, quote, was not dug in, but he was studying all of this data coming in, and he became convinced that he would, quote, weigh down the ticket and potentially be a distraction and complication for defeating Donald Trump in November. So, of course, for the last 3+ weeks, he is office holders and officials, the senators and House members came out and said he should step aside. That was largely for their own political purposes. At home, they were in tough races. But it was the information, the data, I'm told, presenting him with the fact that he was suddenly potentially losing states like a Minnesota, like a New Hampshire. So the battleground map so big, it changed the state of the race here. So history will judge this period as one more Joe Biden decision that took a while to get there. As you know from covering the White House, we covered it alongside. President Biden is often very deliberate. Some Democrats believe too slow in making a decision in this fast-moving world now. But by deciding on this Sunday, Democrats still believe they have time to reset the campaign. We shall see.
Yeah, I mean, you can't overstate the enormity of a decision like this. This is something that we talked to Bill de Blasio about this on Friday night, and he was saying, he was in the presidential race not very long when he was running for the Democratic nomination, but he was talking about how even for him, how much it weighed on him to make a decision like that, to get out of the race. And he was saying what President Biden had in front of him was 10 times that he's
right.
looking at this race, and what a personal decision this is to completely reshape your legacy by making a decision as enormous as this one. And it's interesting that your reporting is that he came to this within the last 48 hours because he got that positive COVID diagnosis last week when he was out in Nevada and had that time to where he was self-isolating to really be alone and weigh a decision as enormous as this one.
Without a doubt. I mean, it's so poignant to think that this is the third presidential race that Joe Biden has stepped away from, of course, back in 1988, in 2008, and now. But the circumstances, of course, are totally different, and the stakes are so much higher. And the fact of the matter is, he is a consumer of news. He reads the newspapers, watches television. He's not in, he's sort of physically in a bubble, but is, a modern day president. So he was aware of what was happening, but it was not until, I'm told, really some people who had his best interests at heart, he thought. Yes, he was angry, we've reported, at Nancy Pelosi for speaking so openly and publicly about this, but it's hard to imagine that those comments did not play a role here. I think as we look back on this, a turning point will be when the former House Speaker essentially reopened the door that he had tried to close by saying, I am running. And he, did not perform much better in those the television interviews that he did sort of in the days after that. So certainly now he will have to defend his decision to remain in the office of presidency. We will see how that plays out. But from here forward, of course, the most urgent question is, does Vice President Harris become the Democratic nominee? We may know that in about 2 weeks' time, Caitlin.
Yeah, and also it's notable, Jeff, just given we did both cover Biden, he made this decision at his Rehoboth Beach, Delaware beach house. It's kind of a place where he would often go to think about big issues. A lot of presidents have used Camp David. Obviously, Rehoboth Beach is often a place of solace for this president. So to make this decision there is also notable. I want to bring in MJ Lee, who is at the White House for us. And MJ, obviously, this decision is landing like a bombshell for a lot of the White House staff who may not have been in that inner circle around Biden to find out about this. What are you hearing from White House officials, but also from Democratic donors that you've been speaking with?
Yeah, Caitlin, I know you know this better than anyone. There is something that a lot of folks who have known President Biden for a long time will often say about the president and his decision-making process. They'll say, he is somebody who can typically take a really long time, sometimes painfully a long time, to deliberate over a really important decision. And then at the end of the day, ultimately, the decision he ends up making is the most obvious one, at least the most obvious one to the people around him. And I think what we saw today and the events and the days leading up to today is precisely that. We have seen the president really think this over for more than 3 weeks now, since that CNN debate at the end of June. He has had a barrage of criticism, so many around him, telling him that the right thing to do for the country and for this race in November is for him to get out. It has taken him a long time, at least in the view of so many around him, to get to this point. But at the end of the day, I think this was clearly, for the party, the obvious choice for him to make. We know this because of a number of really important factors that you need to have behind you if you're going to try to run a winning campaign. We know that the money was drying up. We've been talking about that a lot. Donors were no longer willing to write big checks to support President Biden. The Democratic support was starting to really fall apart. Every day, every hour, we had Democratic elected officials coming out to say that they couldn't get behind the president. The polls obviously were starting to show a real slippage, and including in these key battleground states that really are so critical to the president having any chance of winning and defeating Donald Trump in November. And I think this was always going to be President Biden and the campaign running in full force until the moment that he wasn't. There's no real way for you to run for president 50%. There's no way for you to sort of half be a candidate. And I think that is sort of what we have seen play out, the dynamics that we have seen in the recent days. Up until yesterday, we know that the senior-most folks on the Biden campaign were not even talking about the possibility of the president dropping out. We have been told earlier today that some of the most senior advisors in the West Wing were still not talking about the possibility of the president dropping out. And then here we have it, a really closely held decision unveiled by the president himself in a letter that we are told was only given to the top folks in his campaign and at the White House moments before the president decided that he was ready to go public with it. I also just want to take a moment to talk about the importance of the president quickly coming out to fully endorse his vice president, Kamala Harris. There is so much uncertainty right now about how exactly this race is going to unfold in the coming days and weeks. We are obviously in a really unprecedented situation, but it was important for a lot of people in the Democratic Party to hear the words coming straight out of the president's mouth that in his eyes, the person that needs to take the torch from the president is his deputy, is the person that he chose, is the person who he said could take on the role of the presidency on day one. I was just talking to campaign co-chair Cedric Richmond, and he said there's no question about it. This is an example of President Biden doing the right thing, and he said he was really glad to hear the president coming out to publicly endorse Kamala Harris, and that the campaign is going to be behind her, but sort of the machinations of exactly how the campaign is going to sort of transition over to making that sort of the campaign's operation in the coming days. Obviously, all of those things need to get figured out. But look, I think if there was a scenario where the president had delayed endorsing Kamala Harris in any way, that could have created even more chaos and even more confusion. And I think that was clearly a situation that the president wanted to avoid, Caitlin.
Yeah, MJ Lee, obviously a lot of dynamics at play here. Also dynamics not just there at the White House, down the street at Capitol Hill. We have Manu Raju, CNN's chief congressional correspondent, also here with us. And Manu, I know we're getting reaction from the Democratic leader in the House, Hakeem Jeffries. What is his reaction to this major news from President Biden dropping out of the 2024 race?
Yeah, this just came in praising Joe Biden for his time in office, but also not endorsing Kamala Harris in this statement that he just put out. He called him one of the most accomplished and consequential leaders in American history. He said that in less than one term, he praised him for his work in what he says rescuing the nation from a once-in-a-century pandemic. He praised his economic leader, and he says he, quote, saved our country by defeating the insurrectionist in chief. He went on to say that America is a better place because of Joe Biden, but no mention of what is next. But I can tell you, Caitlin, in talking to Democrats over the past hour, one, a lot of them are surprised. Some of them did not see this coming. But there is a sense of relief among so many Democrats, particularly ones in difficult re-election races, who are concerned that Joe Biden would essentially drag them down with it, worried that it would effectively undercut their ability to take back the House. But one thing that is also uncertain in my conversation so far, is Kamala Harris the best candidate for them to take back the House, to keep control of the Senate? That is a debate that is still ongoing within the Democratic Party, that is still uncertain about whether or not the party will simply all fall in line behind her, or whether or not they believe there's another candidate who could be better for this, suited for them, down ticket. That is something that is still playing out behind the scenes, and perhaps that is one reason why Democratic leaders have not been quick to endorse Kamala Harris the way that Joe Biden has been, because they're trying to assess the impact. They want to talk to their members who are coming back to town tomorrow. But Joe Biden's decision, too, coming on the heels of Congress returning into session tomorrow, where we were expecting even more Democrats to come out, call for him to step aside. 36 had done so publicly. More would do so at the end of the day. But this is a shell-shocked Democratic Party scrambling to figure out what's next. A lot of people are happy about this decision, but what does Kamala Harris mean at the top of the ticket? Will she get the nomination? And what does it mean for the rest of their party? All huge questions that they're still grappling with at this key time, Caitlin.
Yeah, major questions, Manu. And I should note we are now hearing that President Biden and Senator Schumer spoke before President Biden shared the letter announcing online that he was exiting the 2024 race. Manu, thank you for that.
This is CNN Breaking News.
Hello, and thanks very much for joining us. I'm Wolf Blitzer in Washington. We want to welcome our viewers here in the United States and around the world. Caitlin Collins is joining us from New York. And I want to begin with the major breaking news we're following right now. President Biden just announced that he's dropping out of the 2024 presidential race and publicly endorsing Vice President Kamala Harris as the Democratic presidential nominee. He made this truly historic announcement in a statement he tweeted out just before 2 p.m. Eastern earlier today. A stunning decision that he kept very close to his vest, alerting his senior White House advisors and campaign staff only moments before making this public letter to the American people public. And we're also just learning, go ahead, Caitlin.
Yeah, well, we're learning about how quickly this decision was made and also how recently. Our Jeff Zeleny is told this decision was one that President Biden came to within the last 48 hours as he consulted his family, his top advisors on the phone while he is still self-isolating from COVID. His statement that he published just a short time ago reads in part, quote, "While it may have been my intention to seek re-election, I believe it is in the best interest of my party and country for me to stand down and to focus solely on fulfilling my duties as president for the remainder of my term." We have a team of correspondents covering this entire breaking story. Wolf, I want to start with CNN's Priscilla Alvarez, who is in Delaware with the president where he's been. And Priscilla, obviously, this is major news. Manu just describing a shell-shocked Democratic Party following this news from President Biden. What else are we learning about just how he came to this decision that he resisted for 3 weeks from members of his own party, but now has acquiesced to those calls to get out of the race?
And a shock too, Caitlin, to White House and campaign officials, though he notified his senior teams right before putting out this letter. This is certainly coming as shocking news to those here that have joined him, as well as across the campaign. Now, the president, as you mentioned, was here and is here in Rehoboth Beach, Delaware, at his residence, where he has been self-isolating from that positive COVID diagnosis from last week. Now, it was over this course of time that the president was around his senior advisors, his inner circle, which we had learned had grown even tighter by the day, and he was deliberating. Of course, the president had been hearing from Democratic lawmakers, allies, donors over the course of the last more than 20 days since the presidential debate, calling on him to withdraw from the race. We saw that over the course of the last week, and including yesterday. But even so, even as lawmakers were making their call for him to drop out, the campaign was signaling that it was a full steam ahead, that they planned to get him back on the campaign trail and that he was not going anywhere and that there was no plan B scenario. That, as of this morning, as the senior campaign brass was saying that the president was in it to win it. And then this afternoon, hearing directly from the president in this letter where he says that he is not going to seek re-election. And he also notes in this letter that he will be addressing the nation himself later this week. Of course, the president still self-isolating here at his residence in Delaware. Now, right after putting out that letter, the president also answering one of the major questions going forward, and that was whether he would put his full weight behind Vice President Kamala Harris, and that is exactly what he did, saying that he endorses the vice president to be the nominee and calling on the Democratic Party to come together. Now, it has been almost about an hour since that news broke, Caitlin. I have been hearing from sources who work closely and advise donors. They say it is an avalanche of money coming in. The same donors that were withholding those big checks because of the questions over the president's candidacy are now pouring in money now that this announcement has been made. Democratic lawmakers also saying that they acknowledge the president's accomplishments and his record, but they are also standing behind him in this decision. So this opens up a whole new phase only weeks from the Democratic National Convention, where there are still so many questions about this moment, this uncertain moment, and where we go from here. But the president, in addition to saying that he will not seek re-election, is saying that the vice president, or that he endorses the vice president. We should note on the vice president, her schedule today was to be in Washington, D.C. I have reached out to her staff to see where she is now, as well as whether she has spoken to the president. She was in Massachusetts just yesterday speaking to donors at a fundraiser. Also, she has been completely behind the president in this moment. Aides I have spoken to over the last several weeks consistently told me there was no daylight between the two. Now, of course, we'll see what happens from here. But our colleague John King is reporting that the vice president does intend to lay low publicly until the president speaks to the nation. She has a couple campaign stops on her calendar this week. We'll see if she'll move forward from that. But Caitlin, just to go back here, the president really making a stunning announcement today and saying he is not seeking re-election, saying that he is endorsing Vice President Kamala Harris, and all of this coming together in the last couple days while he was self-isolating at his residence here in Delaware. Sources often told us that it was going to be the president that made this decision. That's exactly what he did. Caitlin.
Yeah, clearly a period of self-reflection. Priscilla Alvarez, thank you for that. And Wolf Blitzer, I mean, you're just joining us now on this breaking news. Wolf, you obviously covered the White House for a very long time. You've covered multiple presidents. I just wonder what you make of this pretty stunning news, even despite the fact that it was kind of a drumbeat building within his own party for 3 weeks. But still, the stunning news to see a sitting president step down from running for re-election.
And the way that the president made this announcement in a public statement that he posted on social media, as opposed to directly addressing the American public. If Priscilla Alvarez is still there, I have a couple questions for her. Priscilla, has the White House or the White House physician or anyone at the White House updated us on the president's condition? We know he's self-isolating from COVID in Rehoboth Beach, Delaware right now at his home there. How is he doing?
Yeah, Wolf, we actually received a letter from the White House doctor earlier today, and he said that the president's condition, his symptoms were improving, quote, significantly. We have been hearing from the doctor routinely since the president was diagnosed with COVID. And yesterday, the doctor said that his symptoms were improving and that he was progressing. Today, using the term significantly to describe how the president was feeling in terms of his symptoms, apparently being more mild than the president himself. Feeling better. So the White House doctor, again, has been updating us, did so before we received this letter today to say the president is feeling better. Of course, the president has also been taking Paxlovid and took another dose of that today, but he has still been self-isolating over all this time. And since he arrived here in Delaware on Wednesday, we have not seen him since then. So we are still waiting for guidance on what his schedule looks like this week. Of course, the Israeli Prime Minister's office saying that the two are expected to meet on Tuesday. We have not received White House confirmation of that meeting, but it was going to be a busy week ahead for the president, and he appeared to be on track to be better, to meet those commitments. But we're still waiting to get that updated guidance from the White House as to when the president will be coming out of that self-isolation. Wolf.
We hope he has a speedy recovery from COVID. Another important development, normally under these circumstances, you would think the president immediately would go on television and announce to the American people what's going on. And now the White House is saying in this public letter that the president has posted on social media that he'll do it later in the week. Is that the result of COVID, that he's still suffering, that maybe his voice is not that strong yet? Has the White House explained why he's going to go on television later in the week as opposed to tonight?
We are asking those questions, Wolf, to try to get more clarity as to when exactly he's referring to in this letter when he says later in the week. There is nothing in this White House note from his doctor that suggests that his symptoms aren't improving enough to address the nation. But again, he is here in his residence in Delaware. So it's unclear, too, where he would like to make those remarks when he addresses the public about not seeking re-election. So we are reporting, we're working our sources to try to get more information. Well, we also can't sort of overstate here how stunning a news this was this weekend to get this letter here around 2 in the afternoon. So there are still a lot of pieces being put together here, but we do know that the president wants to address the nation from the letter that he put out. And so we are trying again to get more clarity as to when that will be and why not tonight. But we do know that he is recovering. He's recovering well. I think the outstanding question here is where he wants to make those remarks from, because right now he is self-isolating at his residence here in Delaware.
And we, of course, hope he has a speedy recovery from this latest bout of COVID. Priscilla Alvarez on the scene for us in Rehoboth Beach in Delaware, where the president is recuperating his latest bout of COVID. Hope he has a speedy recovery. I want to bring in Jeff Zeleny right now. Jeff, am I the only one surprised that he's not addressing the American public tonight as opposed to later in the week? And do you suspect it's related to his bout with COVID?
I think that could be it. I mean, he is at his home in Rehoboth, Delaware. Certainly, as you know, Wolf, presidents can always have access to a live television camera. He could simply go downtown Rehoboth with a mask on. He could do that. But I think that he wanted to deliver this news himself, and I'm not sure what the harm is in waiting for him to return to the White House to address the nation. This is, I guess, one more example of how information is disseminated these days. But they did want to keep this closely held. Staff only learned about this, we're told, just moments before it was sent out. He wanted to control what has to be certainly the most difficult political decision he has ever made. But we are getting new information in from the chairman of the Democratic National Committee, Jamie Harrison, who is saying that the work we must do now is unprecedented, but the party will undertake a transparent and orderly process to move forward. So what that means is that they are going to follow the rules, not get right behind Vice President Harris as the president has done. But I'm also learning behind the scenes really for the last week. No one was in Harris's world. Her supporters were trying to push the president out. But in the case he did make a decision, there's been a lot of whipping going on. And by that I mean making phone calls to delegates and try and line up the support for her. So that is happening even with more speed now this afternoon. But look, everyone is not going to come out and support her, but another Democrat official said, who is going to stand up and block her? So it looks like this would be moving that direction, but we shall see. No one would have predicted this just a month or so ago.
Yeah, it's a dramatic development, history unfolding, Manu. And as someone who spent 7 years as a White House correspondent, I know that if the White House and the president wanted to address the American public from Rehoboth Beach tonight, whether at his home or someplace else, he could have easily organized that. The White House media pool which is always on the scene, ready to go. They could have set that up very, very quickly.
Yeah, perhaps there's something to do with his recovering from COVID. He wants to do it in a more presidential setting, maybe from the Oval Office, not necessarily from Rehoboth Beach. Perhaps it's all part of the calculation about how he wants to deliver a message that will go down in American history. I mean, when Lyndon B. Johnson, of course, decided not to run for re-election, that statement that he made is still, of course, being played today. That was such a historic message. This one will be remembered in the psyche of the American public. The big question is, where does this campaign go from here? How do the two parties realign their strategies going forward? Republicans, too, they are scrambling to try to figure out how to go about dealing with the fact that Kamala Harris may be at the top of the ticket. I talked to a number of Republicans in the run-up to this, expecting that perhaps this could happen. They were uncertain. What exactly do they say? Do they go after her political views? They tried to tag her to Joe Biden. They say she covered up for Joe Biden's mental challenges and mental acuity, his cognitive ability. Will that be part of it? And also, Wolf, lawsuits. How Republicans are signaling that they may try to fight this and try to prevent her state by state from getting onto certain ballots. Perhaps they can have some favorable rulings, can make it harder for Democrats going forward. All part of what is uncharted territory as a party try to assess what's next.
All right, hold on for a second.
I just want to say we have a statement from former President Bill Clinton and he is supporting Vice President Kamala Harris. This is a significant development here. We have not yet heard from some of the other presidents, but he's saying this in a statement. Now is the time to support Kamala Harris and fight with everything we've got to elect her. America's future depends on it. So you can imagine the weight something like that would have on these delegates.
Yeah, very significant development indeed. MJ Lee, our senior White House correspondent, is over at the White House right now. What are you learning, MJ?
Well, Wolf, we are obviously hearing from a lot of national Democrats since the president announced that he is dropping out, calling him a patriot, saying that he ultimately made the right decision and the decision that was right for the country. Put right and wrong aside for a second, Wolf. I think what became clear to the president and probably a few of the people around him really involved in making this decision was that ultimately he didn't really have a choice. We saw everything around him really crumbling at such a stunning pace over the last few weeks. Whether it is the money drying up and donors saying that they were not willing to give to the president anymore, whether it was the growing chorus of Democratic elected officials saying that the president needs to go, whether it is the slipping in the polls that we have seen consistently over the last week or so, where not just in the national polls, but in the very battleground states that will be so important in determining whether President Biden could defeat Donald Trump. And the problem here was that in all of those major factors, there was every indication that in all of those things, they were all headed, continuing to head in the wrong direction. This didn't seem like a situation where you give it a couple more days and the situation improve, and that really was what the president was contending with. One source that I was talking to, just in terms of how closely held this decision was, I'm told that he let the staff know at around 1:45, and this is his most senior, most members of the team. And, the tweet that he sent out, that his account sent out with the letter announcing that he was going to be dropping out, went out around 1:46. So clearly the decision was made, and this wasn't the president discussing whether to do this or not with his senior most staff. This was him informing his staff that the decision was made. I also just want to note, in the letter that he sent, he said he is going to focus the rest of his term on making sure that he is finishing out the rest of the first term as well as he can, and really focusing on really just doing the duties of the presidency. What he didn't say there, of course, is the role that he potentially now has to play in supporting his vice president, Kamala Harris, who he endorsed. He now is potentially the biggest surrogate that Kamala Harris could have out on the campaign trail. And this kind of support obviously could come in a lot of different ways. As you were discussing before, the president did say that he is going to be addressing the nation about this decision later in the week. We don't know exactly when, but we expect that he is going to address that decision to endorse Kamala Harris as vice president as the next person that he is going to pass the torch to. The one other final thing I will just note, this might be for a lot of Democrats sort of the president finally making the right decision. There is also a lot of anger, a lot of bad blood, a lot of hard feelings about the way all of this was handled by various Democrats in the party. I was on the phone with campaign co-chair Cedric Richmond, and he unleashed some really harsh words on the donors that in recent days had refused to give to President Biden. And he said that what the donors had done was create a self-fulfilling prophecy, because essentially when the money dries up, there is no way that you can win. And he was saying, look, the donors basically ensured that this was a no-win situation for the president. He said the donors now better pony up, and we are actually seeing the first signs of donors actually turning around and saying, yeah, now that he has decided to step down, we are going to continue supporting this ticket. Wolf.
Dramatic developments indeed, and historic developments we're watching very, very closely right now. MJ Lee at the White House, we'll get back to you. We'll get back to our panel shortly. I want to go to Caitlin Collins, who's also covering all of this for us. Caitlin, these are dramatic developments, and it's come as a surprise to a lot of us after the President of the United States for days and days kept saying he's in it to win it. He's not going anywhere. He's staying in the race. Then all of a sudden, he posts this letter to the American public saying he's no longer going to run.
Yeah, and of course, Wolf, he is recovering from COVID-19 and still experiencing symptoms, though his doctor said in an update just this morning, I read the letter this morning at about 9 a.m., that he is recovering and those symptoms had improved significantly. So that could also play a factor in how we are learning this dramatic breaking news from the president himself in a letter that was posted online announcing he is not going to seek the election and the Democratic nomination for this November to challenge Donald Trump for the presidency. Jamal Simmons is here with us. He is CNN political commentator, but also, and more importantly in this moment, the former communications director for Vice President Harris. And Jamal, I want to talk to you about the Harris dynamic of this, because Senator Mark Warner of Virginia has just lined up behind her. We're watching closely to see what Democrats are saying about this. But first, you worked inside the Biden White House. What's your reaction to this news from the president?
You know, it's an incredible amount of, we kind of thought this was coming, but gosh, it's still so sad, right? I mean, Joe Biden is this American hero. He's such a patriot. He's somebody who saved us from Donald Trump 4 years ago, if you're a Democrat. And so to see him have such a successful political career, a successful presidency, but Father Time is unforgiving. And over time, it became clear that this probably wasn't going to be able to work. So for those of us who were inside, and I think Democrats I've heard from in the last hour or so, there's an incredible amount of excitement about the future, yet sadness about Joe Biden and losing him as a political leader.
Yeah, and of course, all the calls for him to drop out had been talking about what it would mean for his legacy. That's what Colorado Senator Bennett said to me when he was saying essentially that he did not believe Biden could defeat Donald Trump if he remained on the ticket. But with Biden's statement about 20 minutes after he posted this letter saying that he is going to endorse Vice President Harris as the Democratic nominee, we're watching these statements. We're seeing people like Senator Mark Warner, progressive House member Jamal Bowman getting behind her as the Democratic nominee. Is that what you expect to see from the Democratic Party, or is this going to kind of become this complicated contest where you are seeing other Democrats throw their hat in the ring for this nomination?
No, for about 10 days or so, I've been hearing about this movement, particularly of moderate senators, people who are on the line in the upcoming states, a lot of donors who frankly weren't big Kamala Harris fans, a year ago, who've been calling around saying, listen, if this works out and she's the nominee, we will move over. I would expect, I call them the super friends, right? You'll start to see more of the super friends come together. And by that, I mean, we've already seen a statement from President Bill Clinton, from what I just heard on air. I think you may hear from President Barack Obama. You may hear from some of the other big luminary names in the Democratic Party who will come out and say Kamala Harris is the person. Here's the reason why, Caitlin, is because we just don't have a lot of time. We keep saying it's 4 months, but it's not really 4 months. We're about 2 months away from the convention. Once we get to the convention, we're less than 3 months to Election Day. And so when you think about that, literally, you've got so much to do. I don't know that anybody's working on a logo, right? You need a Kamala Harris logo for the yard signs. Somebody's got to print those signs. They got to ship them out to all the states. You've got to make sure that there are going to be what staffing changes are going to occur inside the campaign. And we don't know what that might look like. She's going to also need to, again, obviously have a new travel schedule. everything is going to change. And so you've got to figure out how do you make that work in a very short amount of time. And I'm hearing people talking about that, but it's more than a notion.
Yeah, and we've gotten a statement from the Clintons as well, both Clintons, Bill and Hillary, getting behind Harris for this nomination. Talk about those big names that are coming out. Everyone's going to be watching this closely. Jamal, I want you to stand by because I want more on your thoughts on this, but we are getting new reporting about conversations between President Biden and Vice President Harris. I want to go back to CNN's Priscilla Alvarez, who is covering all of this from Rehoboth Beach, Delaware. Priscilla, what are you learning?
Caitlin, I'm told by a source that President Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris spoke today. It's unclear exactly at what time they spoke. Remember, the president put out his letter publicly that he would not seek re-election earlier this afternoon. But the president made clear after that letter that he was putting all of his support behind Vice President Kamala Harris to be the Democratic nominee, and also calling on the party to come together. Now, the vice president was on the trail yesterday. She was at a fundraiser in Massachusetts, where again she was defending the administration's record and also trying to underscore the stakes of the election. It was a fundraiser that brought in more than $2 million. Today, however, she was back in Washington, D.C. at her residence and with her staff. So this latest reporting is that the president and the vice president have spoken. That, according to a source who I spoke with, we're still trying to get more information as to what that conversation looked like and when exactly it happened. But significant all the same.
Yeah, of course, and also fascinating to learn about these conversations that he was having. Obviously, you expect him to speak with the vice president about this. Priscilla, keep us updated on what you're learning about this. We also have Van Jones joining us. He is CNN's senior political commentator and a former Obama administration official. And Van, obviously, you and I were talking a lot about this dynamic and how this was ultimately going to play out when we were covering the Republican convention in Milwaukee last week. And with this news, this entire campaign has just upended itself.
Yeah, there's a lot of political stuff. The Democratic Party is a family. At the end of the day, this is a family matter. You know, Joe Biden's body may not be as strong as it used to be. His language skills may not be as sharp as it used to be. His heart is as big as ever. His heart is as big and as true and as strong. And this is the difference between a politician and a leader. He made a selfless decision, and people are heartbroken. Even people who are pushing for this to happen. It's kind of like when your grandpa, you got to take the keys, and everybody, you got to take his keys, you got to take his keys, you got to, and he's fighting, and everybody's so frustrated, and then you finally get the keys back, and then you just cry, because this is somebody that you love, this is somebody that you care about, this is somebody who was there for you, this is somebody you wouldn't be here without him, and you have to take something from him. Now, this is not, look, politics is politics, but this is a human moment for one of the great humans in America. This is a huge moment for him, for his family, for all of us who love him, for all of us who wanted him to get across the finish line. But if you're a young person watching this is leadership. This is patriotism. This is what it means to put the country first, and put the party first, and put the cause first. When your arm gets tired, you let somebody else finish pitching the game. That's what Joe Biden has done, and he's done that for all of us. And so I just want to say, I don't know who's going to be the VP, the non-VP. I don't know anything about politics. I just know that I love this man. I care about this man. It was painful every day to sit up here and talk about him like he's just some problem for the party. Wait till we get to the convention. You're going to see people crying, standing, screaming, cheering. He may not get a chance to talk for 10 minutes. We finally get a chance to put our arm around this guy. He did the right thing for this country. He did the right thing for this party. All of us are going to be in this situation someday, and I hope that we take a moment to honor this man and to love this man. I love Joe Biden. I appreciate what he's done, and a lot of people are heartbroken today. Even if it's the right thing, it's still just horrible.
Well, and Van, I mean, on that point, which is a great point that I think resonates with a lot of people, of the personal nature of a decision like this. We often talk about things in a harsh political lens of who's going to fare better, what this looks like. I mean, I also have to imagine what it's been like the last 3 weeks, a little over 3 weeks since that debate, to see, what the reporting has been behind the scenes of Democrats who wanted him to get out. On Friday night, the reporting was that he was seething over, seeing big allies of Pelosi come out and call on him to get out, even upset to a degree with his former running mate, President Obama. And just to see, what he personally has witnessed in these calls from his longtime allies, people who certainly praise his legacy, but said, it's time for this decision to be made.
But have we all gone through this with our own family members? Like, yeah, he's hurt, he's pissed. A lot of us wouldn't have careers. I wouldn't have a career without Joe Biden. Joe Biden picked me out of the puppy pile. He's the person that everybody says he worked for Barack Obama. Now, I worked for Joe Biden when I was in the administration. I was on his middle class task force. All of us have known that embrace. All of us have gotten those phone calls and those cards with bad things have happened to us. So, that's a family. That's what it is. He's hurt now. He feels let down. He feels that his friends turned on him. In the fullness of time, he'll recognize that it was done out of love and as loving a way as possible. But at the end of the day, some people, and I don't want to mention any names and ruin this day, but some people will back their leader no matter what. Some people, they don't care how many people this man has hurt and how many laws he's broken, no matter how many bad things he's done, that's our leader, we're going to back him no matter what. But this party is not like that. This is not a cult. This is a political organization. And we believe in these principles. And if somebody is sick, if somebody can't do it, there's no shame in that. There's nothing wrong with that. If somebody can't do it, that's okay. And what you see with Joe Biden, yeah, everything was falling apart around him, but he could have stuck it out. There were people in this party who wanted him to stick it out. There are people in this party right now who are mad that he didn't stick it out. Don't act like it was all on one side. It wasn't about the donors. It was about, could this man hold together all of us anymore? And when he realized he couldn't, he did the right thing and he passed the baton. That is leadership. Pelosi did the same thing with Hakeem Jeffries. That's leadership, that's responsibility. That's what America's supposed to be about. I love Joe Biden. You have people on both sides of the fight in the party who are crying right now, who can't believe it right now. This is not a normal time, y'all. This isn't just politics. This is a moment in time to honor someone who for 50 years put this country first and sacrificed and sacrificed and sacrificed and sacrificed and sacrificed. And today, he's sacrificed again. That's Joe Biden. I love Joe Biden. This country should get around Joe Biden and help our president through these last few months.
Jamal Simmons, you worked in that administration as well. I wonder what you make of how Van just laid out what a personal decision this was for President Biden to make after facing these calls for 3 weeks now, sustained calls from his own party. And obviously, you worked with him, you worked with Vice President Harris. I wonder what you make of that.
Yeah, listen, as I started out, it's a very sad day. I have heard both Van's sentiments and feel them, right? I mean, there's nothing I found after the assassination attempt last Saturday, when Joe Biden went on television to tell us what was happening. I know people had different feelings. I felt a little easier about it, right? Knowing that Joe Biden was in charge, because here's somebody who was going to be willing to put the American public first and not just his own political needs, not just do what he thought was best for him. And listen, we can try to make this not about politics, and Van, I'm with you. This is
I think we lost Jamal's shot. We'll get him back for that final thought to see what he has to say, because obviously this is not just something we are hearing. Massive reaction from those who have left the White House, those still inside the White House as well, who found out 1 minute before President Biden posted this letter online. Jamal Simmons, Van Jones, thank you both. Wolf, obviously a pivotal moment for this Democratic Party, but also for Republicans as well, who are going to be watching this incredibly closely and with a lot of trepidation about who it is that's going to be replacing Joe Biden on that ticket for November.
And the President of the United States making it clear he wants his Vice President, Kamala Harris, to do exactly that. I want to get reaction to the history that's unfolding right now. Democratic Congressman Eric Swalwell of California is joining us right now. Congressman, thanks so much for joining us. What's your reaction to this major decision from the President of the United States?
Today's decision by Joe Biden to not seek re-election shows the difference between a selfless president and in Donald Trump, a selfish person. And I've got a lot of gratitude, Wolf, toward the president for his entire career. He's stepped up, and oftentimes it was reluctantly, when he could have devoted his priorities in other directions. You know, his career has been, essentially bookended by tragedy. Elected to the Senate, and then he lost his wife and his daughter, and he found a way to heal his family and help his constituents. And then as he leaves the vice presidency and wants to coast into essentially retirement, he loses his son, Beau, and the country is subjected to Donald Trump, and he stepped up once again. And so my children, they and many others will feed their families from the jobs he created. They'll drive on the roads he built. They'll power their computers and their phones by the chips that he manufactured, and they'll live in a land that are more arable and breathable because of the greenhouse emissions that he cut. So I'm eternally grateful to Joe Biden.
Do you support the Vice President Kamala Harris as the next Democratic presidential nominee, Congressman?
I fully support Kamala Harris. And in fact, she's been trained by the best. Joe Biden was a vice president himself, and so she probably had the best mentor to work under. And she's tough, she's smart, she's real, and she's everything that we need as we go up against somebody who would take away every freedom. Trump's Project 2025 would end abortion, force people into marriages. It would ban books and just be an all-out assault on our freedoms. And this vice president, as I said, she's tough, she's real, she's smart, and she's got what it takes.
We just got a joint statement from Bill and Hillary Clinton, Congressman. Let me read a couple sentences from this statement and get your reaction. We are honored to join the president in endorsing Vice President Harris, and will do whatever we can to support her. And then they say, now is the time to support Kamala Harris and fight with everything we've got to elect her. America's future depends on it. Do you anticipate any major challenges to Vice President Harris getting the nomination from other members of your party?
I've seen a ton of other colleagues of mine and leaders weigh in to support Kamala Harris, and I'll let that process play out. But Wolf, I'll just lay it out like this. We can finish the work that Joe Biden has done to restore our democracy and build our economy, or we can turn the greatest country in the world over to a felon, judged, rapist, 6-time bankrupt businessman who sent his friends to violently storm the last office from which he was fired. To me, the choice isn't hard, and it's pretty clear that Kamala Harris would be the best one to inherit that work.
Have you started thinking, Congressman, about who potentially she should choose as her running mate?
Well, we're blessed, as we have seen over the past couple of years, with a number of options and a very deep bench. And so all of us in every way are going to work to support her. But with Kamala, at the top of the ticket and many of the options she has, we can win the House, win the Senate, and win the White House. All of that is in play right now. And I'm just seeing reinvigoration from my constituents, my supporters, and people all over the country. Let's win is the mindset right now.
The Republican House Speaker Mike Johnson is warning that the GOP could file legal challenges over Democrats replacing Biden. Do you think there is any merit to that at all?
If I was faced with Donald Trump as my nominee and potentially Kamala Harris is the other side, I would probably want to talk about process rather than substance as well. I'm not worried about that at all, Wolf. We've got a convention coming up. We have plenty of time. And again, Americans now have a clear choice as to where we could take this country.
Yeah, the Democratic convention coming up in about 2 weeks or so in Chicago. We'll all be there for that as well. There's also, as you know, Congressman, less than 4 months until the November election. Do you think that's enough time for Vice President Harris to run a winning campaign?
Even mentioned her in their statements, but now you are starting to see a bit of a coalescing around the idea that Kamala Harris should be the one on top of the ticket now that Biden is out.
John, you were the very first one to report and break the news that Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer had urged President Biden to step aside. How critical will it be for these Democrats to hear from party leaders, as serious voices in this party, like the Clintons, like Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, Hakeem Jeffries, Jim Clyburn, even Nancy Pelosi?
Well, I think it's incredibly important. These are the leaders of the party, and I believe what you will see from them is an idea that this process, which is obviously has to be expedited, needs to be orderly. There still is a view among some of those leaders you just mentioned that it's actually best for Kamala Harris, if she is to be ultimately the nominee, or for whoever it is, to have some kind of a process and it not be seen simply as a coronation, a hand and you're the one, Kamala Harris, to have some kind of a process. I would be surprised if there is a serious challenge mounted to Kamala Harris, but they have to go through this. The delegates ultimately have to vote. As we talked about earlier, Rachel, Kamala Harris doesn't have a single delegate right now. I mean, those were Biden delegates. It was Joe Biden that ran in the primaries. It was Joe Biden that got 14 million votes in the Democratic primary. Now, the point that Elizabeth Warren mentioned in her statement is Kamala Harris obviously was chosen by the delegates in 2020, and she won and was elected vice president in November of 2020. Voters saying, we're voting for Biden at the top, and we're voting for Kamala Harris to replace Biden if anything should happen to him as president. That's different than, this process, which is, picking your candidate for the next 4 years, but it's an indication of the strength that she has demonstrated in a national campaign, which none of the other potential candidates we've been talking about have.
John, thank you. Important points that you're making, that she does not have a single delegate. There's still so many questions and still a lot to play out in this process. And I want to take this now back to our chief White House correspondent, Mary Bruce. Mary, we were just talking to John about the importance of Democratic leaders weighing in. You reported just moments ago about the Clintons weighing in. Now you're getting word from the Obamas as well.
We are, Rachel, and this is a very lengthy statement from the office of Barack and Michelle Obama. I'm going to bear with me as I read through this in real time here. He praises his former vice president, saying Joe Biden has been one of America's most consequential presidents, as well as a dear friend and partner to me. Today, we've been reminded again that he's a patriot of the highest order. That lines up, of course, with so much of the praise that we have heard for Joe Biden and so much of the pressure that was put on him to step aside for the good of the country. The Obamas go on to mention that what they admire most about Joe Biden is his deep empathy and hard-earned resilience, his fundamental decency and belief that everyone counts. They tick through some of his many accomplishments while Biden has been in office during his first term. And they say more than that, President Biden pointed us away from the 4 years of chaos, falsehood, and division that had characterized Donald Trump's administration. Through his policies and his example, Joe has reminded us of who we are at our best, a country committed to old-fashioned values like trust and honesty, kindness and hard work, a country that believes in democracy, rule of law, and accountability. They praise his track record and everything that he has fought for throughout his life. He also says that he knows Joe Biden has never backed down from a fight, and for him to look at the political landscape and decide that he should pass the torch to a new nominee is surely one of the toughest in his life. The Obamas saying, but I know he wouldn't make this decision unless he believed it was right for America. It's a testament to Joe Biden's love of country and a historic example of a genuine public servant, once again putting the interests of the American people ahead of his own, that future generations of leaders will do well to follow. Looking ahead, the Obamas mentioned we will be navigating uncharted waters in the days ahead, but I have extraordinary confidence that the leaders of our party will be able to create a process from which an outstanding nominee emerges. I believe that Joe Biden's vision of a generous, prosperous, and united America that provides opportunity for everyone will be on full display at the Democratic Convention in August, and I expect that every single one of us are prepared to carry that message of hope and progress forward into November and beyond. The former president ending by saying, for now, Michelle and I just want to express our love and gratitude to Joe and Jill for leading us so ably during these perilous times. What you will notice most about that statement is what Barack Obama does not mention, which is Kamala Harris. For now, that was a very lengthy statement all about Joe Biden and looking ahead to the uncharted waters, as they said, that are now in front of this entire country. But the Obama not willing just now to name any names. For now, taking the moment to simply reflect on the tremendous political legacy of President Joe Biden.
And Mary Bruce reporting on that reaction in real time from former President of the United States, Barack Obama. Mary, thank you. I want to go now to our White House correspondent, Selena Wang, our senior White House correspondent who is in Delaware traveling with the president. Selena, you are learning more just about how quickly the president made this decision.
Yeah, I mean, this was so closely held that I'm told that his senior staff and his senior campaign team did not know about his decision until a minute before that letter went out. They found out at about 1:45 p.m. today, and Biden's letter came out at 1:46 p.m. today. And this source, who is part of the administration, senior administration, tells me that the message last night from the president was that things were still full steam ahead. And that's what I was hearing when I was talking to aides and campaign staff last night. They were still digging their heels in. They were still defiant. They told me that the president was upset and angry over some of his closest allies turning against him. Their message to me was that they still believed there was a path forward, though they did couch that by saying the president was listening to more of those folks who were saying that it was time to step down and pass the torch. But I do want to mention that there is now this chaos, which is the split now about where to go next, right? We've been talking about Vice President Harris, that critical endorsement from President Biden, but I've been getting a lot of messages just in the last few moments that we've been on air from donors and delegates who are clearly divided on the best way forward. What is clear is that all the folks I've been talking to are relieved that President Biden has made this decision. Some of them are very excited that he is backing Harris. They believe that this will eliminate the dogfight leading up to the convention and will keep the party unified as they try to defeat Donald Trump. But others are telling me that they want to see some sort of mini primary. They don't want to see a coronation of Vice President Harris, and they want there to be other options. One donor who is very well connected telling me that every single donor that he's been talking to just in the last hour agrees with him on that point. So we're going to continue to see this play out. And just in the moment right before you came to me on air, I did get a message from Senator Klobuchar's office and from her herself. She's saying she is backing Vice President Harris, saying, quote, I worked with her in the Senate for years and we became closer friends even when we ran against each other. So we will all be tracking how all of this continues to play out among lawmakers.
Selena Wang with that reaction just coming in as well. If you are joining us now, we're on the air because there is breaking news. President Biden has officially dropped out of the 2024 race. He did so by posting on social media. You heard there from our senior White House correspondent, Selena Wang, talking about just how quickly the president of the United States made this decision. It caught many of his aides, some of his close advisors, many Democrats on Capitol Hill off guard. We've been walking through the latest developments of the president now exiting this race. Just about 100 days to go until the November election. We also know at this hour that President Biden has now endorsed his own Vice President, Kamala Harris. We have yet to hear from the Vice President herself. John Carl has been making the point on our air that she doesn't even have a single delegate yet. There are so many questions about just how this process is going to play out. But we have heard from a number of Democratic senators who are throwing their weight behind Vice President Kamala Harris. As we know, we are just a few weeks out from the Democratic National Convention, and the election is coming very close. I want to turn now to a historian, Mark Updegrove, who joins us now. Mark, I want to talk to you just about the historical significance, the weight of this moment. We were already heading into this pivotal election year where you had this rematch between President Biden and former President Donald Trump. But now, with just over 100 days to go until the election, President Biden making this decision to exit the race.
Yeah, another reflection of the unprecedented events that we see rolling out this year, Rachel, and I think it reminds me of 1968, the last time we had an incumbent president who was eligible for re-election opt not to seek or accept his party's nomination. That was Lyndon Johnson in 1968. But there are so many other parallels there as well. Political violence. That year we saw the assassinations of Martin Luther King and Bobby Kennedy. We've seen, of course, this year the assassination attempt on President Trump's life. We saw divisions and discord and volatility in 1968. We're seeing that again this year, but truly another reflection of the unprecedented times in which we live, Rachel.
Mark, I want to ask you how history is going to look back on this debate. There was so much to be said about this debate happening so early in a presidential election cycle. Just as Americans were sort of kicking off their summers, they were tuning into this debate. Then this is when you had President Biden. He really struggled to answer critical questions, even on issues that were at the core, at the center of his campaign, including abortion rights. And then after that, we started to hear from the panic from Democrats almost immediately as the president got off of that debate stage. How will history look back on that moment in history as a turning point in American politics?
Well, I think you said it, Rachel. It was the turning point for Joe Biden. It was determinative. As much as he wouldn't want it to be, that is how voters looked at Joe Biden. And there were many questions before that debate about his acuity, about the old age affecting his performance as president, and really that debate performance reinforced it. But I think Joe Biden made the right decision for history, for his country, for his legacy. He has talked many times about the central cause of his presidency being the preservation and the strengthening of democracy. We saw that in his statement earlier today. The last of the accomplishments that he enumerated in his statement was, we've protected and preserved our democracy. That will be how we remember Joe Biden, partly because he staved off the challenge by President Trump in 2020. He jeopardized that pillar of his legacy by continuing to be in the race, Rachel. So in giving this off to another candidate, there's a better chance of a democracy in the eyes of Joe Biden being preserved and strengthened with another candidate going forward.
Mark, one more question I want to ask you, because when I talk to those who are close to the president, one word they mention is legacy. And so much of the push from Democrats on Capitol Hill to get him to step aside in this moment at this time was to preserve his legacy. Obviously, not just his time serving as president of the United States in the White House. President Biden also spent 36 years in the Senate. He obviously was also former President Barack Obama's vice president. I think there are two sides to this coin, of course, because now you have the president stepping aside. That does allow him to pass the torch in this way, but this is also happening so close to the election. What will the impact of this decision at this time be on his legacy?
It's so hard to say, but I think that history will reflect that Joe Biden has done the right thing for his country and for his party. He got into this race after Charlottesville, after I think President Trump refused to condemn the actions of those who were clearly racist and anti-Semitic. And he wanted to ensure that our democracy was preserved. He's done an admirable job of doing this, returning us to democratic norms and traditions, reviving NATO around the liberation of Ukraine from Russian invasion. Those are extraordinarily important aspects of Joe Biden's legacy. But again, Rachel, he would put that in jeopardy if he were to remain in the race, given the poll numbers right now and how voters and members of his party are seeing Joe Biden in this moment. The candidate he was is not the candidate he is in this moment. So I think history will reflect the fact that Joe Biden stepped in, staved off a challenge from Donald Trump in 2020, preserved us to democratic norms, but now the torch is being passed to someone else who's in a better position, rather, to stave off another threat from Donald Trump to our democracy, Rachel.
Historian Mark Updegrove, thank you so much for your analysis and your time. I want to turn now to our senior national correspondent, Terry Moran, because, Terry, there is already this shadow campaign that has started for who could possibly be Vice President Kamala Harris's running mate.
Absolutely. And President Obama, the most popular Democrat of this century, just invited people to join it by ostentatiously not offering his and Michelle Obama's endorsement for Kamala Harris. He basically says that the game is on. Now, no Democrat wants to do anything that would contribute to the Democrats losing. Winning is everything in this election, and so any Democrat who wants a future in the party, as all these potential rivals do, don't want to be a spoiler. Nevertheless, Kamala Harris has, some potential weaknesses. She is the best known of all of them, having already run on a national ticket and having a national profile, but that can run against people too. And it may with her. The polls show she's slightly more favorably viewed by the public than the president, but she also has higher negatives than the others. They're less well known. And every move that she makes now is going to be watched. And if the polls come in as they will, showing either a tight race, or if they come in with her not performing as well as people might hope, that plus Obama's essential encouragement there could start a process that would lead